Right, having hard conversations. So we're going to learn a couple of communication strategies that you can use in your daily life that can help you be more autonomous and have more of portray more of your opinion instead of just following other people's opinions. And it can be hard and difficult, but we'll figure out how to have those hard conversations. And just to introduce ourselves, my name is Shijun Jiang, and I'm an academic coach at HLC Highland Campus. And I like to cook, bake, and garden just so that we get to kind of know more about each other. Just write in the comments what you like to do and what you're studying. And my partner in this webinar is Thomas Blaine, and he'll introduce himself.
Cool. Welcome, everybody. I'm also at the Highland campus with Sejun. And as it says there, I like to watch and perform live music. There's not much live music going on right now. I am recording music at home, which is an art form in itself. But it's good to have a project. I always like to have a project at the house. What I really like about this topic is, a lot of these strategies are really useful for, maybe communicating with your employer, maybe your professor, or even like a partner or your family. So it's like a lot of these skills can be used in different parts of your life. So I really hope that's useful for you all. I really love talking about this stuff. I see that Monica likes exercise, which is awesome. Maya is studying automotive technology, which is awesome. Great skill to have. Also a big movie fan. And Samantha likes to roller skate. I remember going to Playland up there on 183, which is like deliciously 1980s, and they play all these old songs I haven't heard since I was in elementary school. But I digress. So let's go ahead and get started. Sejun, if you wouldn't mind skipping over. Oh, and Madalena said she's studying dental hygiene. You play guitar and drums, awesome. And all types of art, great to hear. So just before we launch into the content of this webinar, I just wanted to give everyone a little overview of academic coaching for those of you who don't know. So our mission there at the top is to promote student success proactively by providing personalized and holistic evidence-based support in an accessible, non-judgmental, and student-centered format. So we really, our team likes to be available for all students of all ages at any time, we can. Obviously, we're all virtual right now. However, we can get you in same day. So if you log on to our website at 10 a.m., we'll be able to fit you in that day. So we're doing our best to meet urgent needs during COVID. So you'll see here, there's a list of the topics that are our specialties. So we have, test prep and test taking, obviously a big one for you guys. Navigating Blackboard, we have a lot of new students this semester, and maybe they use like Canvas or Google Classroom at high school. So, Blackboard, there's like so many menus and so many different functions. So if you need help with that, come and see us. Time management's a big one, note taking, reading skills, comprehension, setting goals and planning for the future, something we do a lot. General organization, like that could be like physical items or that could be digital items as well. As Sejun kind of touched on as well, like advocating for yourself. The thing about college is it's like, well, you do have more responsibility, more freedom. However, if you don't advocate for yourself, you can slip through the cracks. Your instructor may not email you if you didn't turn an assignment in. So we need to advocate for ourselves to make the most out of being at the college. So we can help you with some mindfulness and, anxiety strategies and motivation and persistence, which has been especially important during COVID when we're all cooped up in the house. It's like, I was saying to a colleague today, I was like, I never thought that students would want to go to school again. And here we are, and everybody just wants to leave the house and go to school, myself included. I want to go to work. So I think that's kind of it. So June, I might send it over to you at this point.
Okay. And before we delve into the more of the contents, here's what we're going to be talking about for an hour. So one is passive aggressive and assertive communication styles. So we'll see what these three different types of communication styles mean and how they can help you portray what you are really trying to say when you say something to somebody. And also using I statements and when you will be using these I statements. So, how do I do something when in certain situations? Also, there are cultural differences in communications depending on each person's background and where you're speaking, in what setting, what environment. So we'll talk about that, as well as some of the effective communication styles or some of the rules that maybe you can follow in order to be more effective in the online space specifically. And at the end, we'll ask you for any discussion topics that you want to talk about, or if you have any questions on the conversation communication skills or how to communicate with certain people or your family, your friends, or your professors. And we also have some example discussion questions that we can discuss if nobody wants to share any of the questions. And before we begin, I just wanted to mention Nancy likes to exercise and get together with friends. Obviously, it's something that's quite difficult to do right now, but I'm sure Nancy has found some ways that she can still enjoy herself and exercise and talk with her friends. And hello, Gabriella. She's studying business management and she likes to take care of her dogs. And she just started working out daily. Awesome.
That's awesome. It's
Awesome.
it's always amazing, Gabriella, how doing physical things helps your brain. I used to my old job when I used to live close to UT campus. I used to ride my bike to campus, and it was always like a really good start to the day to do that kind of thing. So that's awesome. Just one other
Hmm.
thing I wanted to point out that if at any point there's something you had a question about or you want to jump in, please just unmute your mic or put us something in the chat. We love for this to be a conversation with you guys, so please don't feel like you're interrupting. Just go for it. Sorry,
For
Sejun.
sure. That's okay. Make sure you can say whatever you want, as long as you're not interrupting in the middle or other people. So let's go. So passive, aggressive, and assertive communications. So who's familiar with these three different communication styles? Has anybody heard of them? Not really, right?
I'm sure you've
Um,
definitely experienced them.
yeah, for sure, for sure. I think we just haven't seen them in like this, definition or like labeling the style of communication, right? So during passive communication style, a person would prioritize the needs and wants and feelings of others, even at their own expense. So during passive communication, this person is being really generous, but then they're really not thinking about their circumstances or taking care of themselves, right? And in aggressive communication style, a person would express that only their needs, wants, and feelings matter. So, a person who used to using aggressive communication style would only think about themselves. So, they can be, sometimes labeled as selfish, but at least they're kind of taking care of themselves, right? But the assertive communication style, in this kind of communication style, a person would emphasize the importance of both people's needs. So it's not just other people or just themselves, but both people so that it brings a positive outcome for both people. So here's an example. So there's a scenario where a friend asks to borrow your car. This will be a big inconvenience for you. So a friend's asking to borrow your car, but then you have to use it and it's kind of out of gas. So you're trying to, put in the gas. So there are different circumstances that makes it very inconvenient for you. But if you're passive communication, if you're used to passive communication, you would say, yeah, I guess that's fine. Do you need me to fill the tank? So even though your friend's borrowing the car, you're not only letting them use it, even though you have to use it, but you're also asking if you can fill the tank for them, right? So you're only thinking about your friend. And if you are more used to aggressive communication style, you would say, "No way. Why would I let you borrow my car? You're crazy to even ask that." So you're you're not understanding, you're not even asking why your friend needs to borrow a car, but then you're just flat out saying, "Of course not. It's my car. Why are you even trying to use my car?" Right? And if you're used to using assertive communication style, you would say, "I need my car that day, but I'll have time to drop you off." So you're both telling your friend that you also need to use a car, but then you're willing to help your friend get to somewhere that they need to. Right. So you're thinking about both yourself and your friend, and this kind of answer will bring the best of both worlds, right? And it'll bring positive outcome for both your friend and yourself. All right. So we'll practice this. So the scenario is that your boss asks you to work extra hours this weekend. You usually want to work more hours, but you have final exams coming up and a family event to attend. So let's say if you were using passive communication style, what would your answer be? You can leave in the comments or you can turn on your mic and you can say it as well.
And if you're not working at the moment, just think, you don't have to be working, but say you have another commitment and somebody's asking you to do something else. So you can
Hmm.
just generalize this if you like.
Right.
Any ideas for a passive response on this one? Feel free to put it in the chat, like Sejun said. So remember, passive is when we're looking after the other person's needs, not ours.
Only at others.
Okay, Sejun, so Amy in the chat says, sure, whatever you need. So
Hmm.
that's a really good example of a passive response because Amy's like, yeah, I'll do whatever. But in actual fact, she has a busy weekend. So she doesn't
Right.
really have time. So she's prioritizing her boss's needs. So thanks, Amy.
And I think one example that we have is like, okay, that should be fine. When would you like me to work? So like you're not telling your boss when you're available, but then you're asking the boss, when are you needing someone to work
Hmm.
for you? Right. Thank you for your answer, Amy. What about aggressive communication? Let's say you're asked to work extra hours, but you're busy this weekend. How would you answer using aggressive communication style? An aggressive communication style is when you're only thinking about your convenience, right?
I think that aggressive communication style can come out a little more in times of stress. So for all of us during
That's
COVID, we,
true.
we may have experienced more of that.
Hmm.
So Maya said in the chat, Sejun, that no, that's not what I'm scheduled for,
Hmm.
which is a pretty good aggressive response because it's kind of like a brick wall. It's like, no, I'm not doing
Right.
it. There's no movement there. There's no compromise whatsoever.
No compromise. And another, Monica said, "Yeah, right. No way. Don't you know I'm a student and it's finals week?" That's aggressive.
Yes.
Yeah. And another example that I have is, I can't work more hours. Why would you even ask me that? So it's also saying, like, there's no way I'm working more than I am assigned, right? Okay. But then let's say after, this webinar, everyone's trying to be more assertive and then thinking both yourself as well as the others. So when you're using assertive communication style, how would you answer to your boss?
So here we're trying to balance our needs with the needs of our boss, which is not easy. It is definitely that's actually why assertive communication can be difficult
Hmm.
because it's a fine line we walk. So Maya says, I can work a few extra hours, but I also have some other obligations this weekend.
That sounds great. You're telling them that I am understanding your needs, but I also have my needs. So let's see how this will work out. And then
It's really
another
good, Maya.
example, yeah, it is really good. It's not too you're not putting anything like too far, you know. You're not putting forth too much of your opinion. So I think that's good. And another example that we have is I have a really busy weekend with with the family event and final exams, but please let me know next time you need extra help on the weekend. So this example is saying I can't really work this weekend, but let me know next weekend if you need help on other weekends. It's a really soft and understanding way of refusing instead of just saying no, I cannot work at all. But this is saying I can next time, but not this time in a very polite way.
Exactly, and I think that in the real world, if you'll find yourself in this position where you're applying for a job and you get hired, having a conversation up front about your responsibilities with your classes is really helpful. So then in 2 months down the track, when they're like, can you work extra hours? You're like, oh, I have my classes. So, you've already prepared them for that. So always be transparent where you can and give them information to work with.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the communication is a really key, especially in work environment, because you both your boss and yourself need to really communicate in both of their needs so that they can meet in the middle ground where it's happy for both, not just your boss or not just the employee. Any questions so far with passive, aggressive, and assertive communication styles? Anything that's confusing? Any clarification?
I think when we're considering this stuff, it's interesting to think. Sometimes it's clear to me that you guys are good at conceptualizing this information already, but what we find is the challenging thing is when you're in a conversation and you start to get a little emotionally charged, how do you
Hmm.
communicate assertively when you're feeling a little bit maybe upset or maybe you're like offended? So that's the challenge because if Sejun's my boss and he said, can you work extra hours? If I'm annoyed, then that often comes through in the communication. So often it's a matter of like taking a step back, taking a breath, not responding to an email right away so you can have a more kind of balanced response.
Controlling your emotion or feelings can be difficult at times, but I
Hmm.
think it's important that we are recognizing how we feel and how we are thinking about the situation so that if we are too geared toward following our emotion instead of being in balance, maybe we can take a step back and tell them, maybe I'll give you an answer, in 3 hours or tomorrow, and then kind of think about it. And then when you're calm, you can answer them, right? Next slide is using I statements. Thomas Gordon, he developed the concept of an I statement in the 1960s and contrasted these statements to you statements, which shift blame and attributions to the listener. I statements enable speakers to be assertive without making accusations, which can often make listeners feel defensive. So, in other words, let's say there's an example: a father wants his young child to stop calling him rude names during playtime. Then a common response can be, hey, if you call me a rude name one more time, I'm going to send you straight to bed. Right? It's a very common thing to say for a father to their children. But I statement response can be, I feel very sad when I hear rude words because they hurt my feelings. I like playing with people who use nice words, right? Do you see the difference? It's less of just calling that person out and really explaining what you are feeling and why it's hurting your feelings and what you like to do, right? Instead of what you did is wrong and you're a bad person. And the second example is a woman becomes angry when her sister borrows her favorite coat and returns it with stains and a tear. A common response can be, you ruined my jacket. Are you ever going to grow up? I'm never letting you borrow my coat again, right? But I statement response can be, I am upset that my coat was damaged or stained because I can't afford to replace it. I really appreciate it when the things I loan out are taken care of. So instead of just blaming that person, your sister, you're explaining how you're feeling and why you are not happy with how things turned out and what you want to do, what you like doing. So you like loaning things out when they are taken care of, right? Instead of getting damaged. So we'll practice I statements. So effective I statements include these four elements: how you feel, what you have that feeling about, and why you feel this way, and what you would like to see instead. So, how you feel, it can be like, I feel angry, I feel upset, I feel unhappy. And what you have that feeling about the way he spoke to me, about the situation that we're currently in, about the temperature of Texas summer, why you feel this way, because it embarrassed me in front of my friends, because this situation brought me to tears, because the summer heat in Texas makes me sweat every time I step outside, and what you would like to see instead. I would prefer that we discuss these things in private, right? Instead of saying it in front of everybody. I would prefer, Texas be less hot, or I would prefer that I don't have to go outside in the summer. Okay. So there's a scenario, and we're going to practice saying an I statement so everybody can either turn on their mic and say it, or you can type it up on the chat. So the scenario is Susanna is completing a group project in her sociology class. David, her partner, has not completed his part of the project and it is due in 3 days. What would Susanna's common response be? I think if I were a Susanna and I was giving a common response, I would be like, David, what have you been doing for the past week? You haven't done anything. Do your work on the project right now. We only have 3 days. But what would her I statement be like? Leave it on the chat.
Also, we can build this one up in 4 pieces if you like. So if you just want to
That's
do the how
true.
you feel piece, feel free. We
Mhm.
can build it up from piece 1 to piece 4.
Yes.
So how is Susanna feeling? Put yourself in her shoes. We've all been in this situation, and believe me, when you're in the workforce, this problem continues. It doesn't end when you're working with friends on in college. So how is Susanna feeling? Susanna's feeling stressed. Sejun Maya says,
Mhm.
I agree, Maya. I think she's probably feeling stressed. Why do you think she's feeling stressed, Maya or somebody else? Okay, so Amy feels like, it's a shared project, but all the pressure is on her.
Mm,
So I think that's pretty justified at this point.
mhm. And
Why? Sorry, Sejun.
what is Susanna feeling stressed or pressured about?
Okay,
So
so
Susanna is stressed about getting a poor grade, right?
Mhm.
Or not completing the assignment or turning in late, right? She also feels stressed because the due date is in 3 days and her partner didn't complete his part.
Mhm. So I really think we've satisfied the why Susanna feels that way because Maya said she doesn't want to get a poor grade. So I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. And what would Susanna like to see instead?
So I don't think this necessarily has to be a solution per se, but I think it's a stepping stone to a solution. So it's like you've indicated what you're feeling, but it's like, what's our way out of this situation? We have 3 days to get this done. how can we accomplish what we need to accomplish in the next 3 days? What do you guys think?
Hmm.
I'm going to give you a little hint here. So Nancy said, I would like for you to show me what you have done tomorrow so we can finish this project on time. What do you think, Sujun?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think I really like that she was being extra specific. So instead of, I would like you to work on the project. She said, I would like for you to work on it tomorrow and then we can work together so that we can finish it. Right?
I also like, Nancy, that you use the word we, because let's
Hmm.
put ourselves in David's shoes for a second here. And David's maybe stressed because he doesn't actually know how to complete his part. So maybe we've made an assumption that he's slacking and he's not doing it. And maybe that's partly true, but also maybe he needs some more support. So what I like about Nancy's response is she's not saying, I've done my part, whereas part B, she's saying, okay, let's come together and see what we can do to get this thing done. So it's practical, which I like.
Hmm. So if we put everything together, it might sound something like, David, I feel stressed and pressured about this assignment. This assignment's due in 3 days and we haven't finished it yet. And I'm afraid that we're gonna get poor grade. I would like for you to show me what you have done tomorrow so that we can complete this project on time together. I think this sounds much better than, hey, David, why haven't you finished your project? You know, I have done my part. Why haven't you done your part? Right. Which I think is a common response to group projects, in this situation. Right. And we have another example, and it can sound something like, I'm worried that we won't finish this project by the deadline. I really want a good grade in this class because I'm transferring to Texas State. Can we make a plan for the next 3 days?
So I think with these I statements, I think that when you're talking to someone in person, the words that you use and the tone which you put those words across is really important. If you deliver an I statement with sarcasm, then you're defeating the purpose.
Mm.
So, like your choice of words and the way it's delivered is also important. So do consider that, because when we're making an I statement, we don't want to like belittle somebody or humiliate them. We're really trying to get the best out of them so we can achieve whatever goal that is. Can anybody think of like a person an experience from their own life that they might want to share, or any comment on this particular scenario? It's definitely food for thought. I think that sometimes with this stuff, takes a minute just to for it to sink in. But I think we all kind of have the building blocks of I statements, so it's just a little bit of a tweak, I think, for many of us.
For sure. And it just takes extra effort and extra, thought about thinking that, you're gonna try this statement, right? So it just takes like one try, but then I think it gets easier after that.
So Maya was just saying that she's been in group projects before and immediately delegated sections of the project for each person to do. Maya, you sound like a professional. You've been in this situation before. And also, Maya, I think just to jump on that idea, which I think is wonderful, sections and a timeline for sections. In coaching, we develop a lot of goals, smart goals for students, and part of that is it's like, okay, you have this goal, but when are you going to do it? Because some people need a deadline or else they won't do it. So
Right.
that's an awesome strategy, Maya.
Mhm. Yep. Any other questions or comments for using I statements? If not, we'll go to the next slide. Okay. So here are some of like frequently asked question type of deal with, how to make a good conversation, right? So how do I even start a difficult conversation, right? This is a tough thing to do, right? First, it's important that you are in a calm place to have the conversation. right? Your environment matters because everything you see, hear, or touch, feel, they affect your mood and your feelings. And second, it can be useful to arrange it with the other person so they can be more prepared. Can we take some time to talk this evening? Also, the language and tone that you use very important here. So you don't want to sound like, "Can we have some time to talk this evening?" That sounds like you're about to fight that person, right? So making sure that the other person is also expecting, the difficult conversation instead of, trying to fight, right? We need to talk, that kind of, it definitely puts a different tone and different feeling to the other person, right? And how do I navigate, keep my cool in confrontational situations? Many confrontations can be avoided in the first place, right? At the start of the conversation, it can help to say something like, "I can understand that you're frustrated," right? Telling them that you understand how they feel. As much as you can, try to avoid placing blaming on anyone. Often a confrontation escalates because someone is told or perceives that they're told that it's their fault and tries to defend themselves, right? Where possible, you can frame the situation as a shared problem. Especially with your family or your siblings, I think sometimes it's just really hard to keep your cool. But then you just got to understand that, we're all together. We're trying to fix this issue. Just blaming somebody doesn't really solve the problem, right? If a situation becomes too tense and you're not making progress, you can take a break and return to the conversation when things have settled down. It's hard to reach a positive outcome when both parties are upset. Yeah, it's something that we talked about before. So it's really important that, when either or both parties are upset or not feeling like they can have a calm or cool conversation, it's definitely important that they take a break and return to it when both of them can have that calm conversation. And especially during COVID, Tom says it's especially COVID, it can be tough for everyone, right? So everyone's having difficult times or having tough feelings, right? So and the third one's, how do I change my approach between talking to my partner, my children, my colleagues? And this is challenging because our relationship with these people is different. For example, it may be easier to be assertive with your children because you have some natural authority. However, that is not the case with a partner or your colleague, right? This ultimately comes down to judgment. Consider your audience and try to be clear with your message. Misunderstandings are responsible for a lot of conflict. And I think this actually occurs more often than we think, I think, because we're so used to being with the family, but then when we go out and then go to college or start to have a job, those relationships are different, and we need to really learn and experience how to talk to someone that's not your family or that's not your parent, right? Any questions so far? Any other questions or comments? Okay, then we'll move on to the next slide.
All right. So we did want to point out that, in some ways we're all living in the same culture in this state and this city, but within that, there's a lot of different ways that different cultures communicate. And, I've put that example there of a student who said to me, this is in their own words, "Now I need assistance to register. Please help me with this." So I was at that point helping students with registration, and that was an email I got. And when I first got it, I was like, oh, there wasn't any "Dear Thomas, dear Mr. Blaine, hello, hope you're having a good day." And immediately I was like a little bit like, oh, that felt a bit rude. And then the more I thought about it, the more I was kind of like, well, that's kind of the system I was raised in. And I don't think we can assume that everybody's raised in the same system. So I think we need to keep that in mind when we're having any difficulties with communication in general. And also I think we need to be aware that culture does not just relate to race or ethnic group. You could have, the Indian American community in Austin. Within that community, there's cultural differences, right? So it's a trap to think that, oh, the American community in Austin all do the same thing, because of course they don't. So we just need to keep that in mind. Often there is commonality, and that's part of culture as well. But just being understanding that everybody communicates in different ways, and people have different upbringings. Myself, I have two brothers and two sisters, so I am used to fighting for the last slice of pizza on the kitchen table. However, my wife is an only child and she hasn't experienced that. So we come at life from very different angles, and that's true of a lot of people. So here's a couple of examples here. I just pulled them off online. So like the second example there is, in many cultures, eye contact indicates attentiveness and respect. I read that in Ghana, if a child looks at an adult in the eye, it's considered an act of defiance. So, the authority structures in different countries and different cultures are different. So that's another example. I read also that in China, it's quite common. You meet someone on the subway and they might ask you for your instant messaging account instead of your email. In our culture, if you met someone on the bus and they're like, "What's your Instagram?" you might be like, "Oh," you might be taken aback by that. You might not, but just making the point that, different cultures do things in different ways. And sometimes we can be quick to rush and judge when somebody has said or done something without having a full understanding of their background. Yeah, so like the takeaway I have at the bottom there is we don't know people's background. So like if there are communication problems and something's coming up, don't be afraid to send that email and say, just to double check, did you mean that you want it done by the end of the day Friday or Friday lunchtime? Just like a clarifying question never hurts. And if you're respectful about it, the other person will be like, "Oh yeah, sorry, I meant end of the day." So don't ever hesitate to, clarify with that person. I think it goes a long way. Did anyone have anything to add on that? I know this is like a complex issue that I'm trying to distill into a slide. We could talk all day about this one. Does anyone have anything that they want to share from, their own culture or some culture that they've experienced? I
I think
think.
one thing that I can say is that just don't be too surprised when someone has different ways of communicating or different styles.
Mhm.
You know, just like understanding that everyone can have different, styles of communication, and it can come from their culture, right? And it's okay, right? It's okay to have different communication styles. It doesn't mean that they're rude to you, or it doesn't mean that it's affecting your relationship with that person. It's just different.
Exactly, Sajun. I think in a lot of Western countries, being outspoken is valued. So if somebody is not being very responsive to you, that might be, their way of showing respect or patience. So yeah, I think Sejun makes a really good point there. So just again thinking about what you value in your culture. Maybe you value being outspoken and speaking your mind, but that's not everybody's culture. So this is very complex, but these are really good things to think about. Really for your studies, but also when you leave and you're in the workforce. Because, say you move to Houston for a job, one of the most diverse cities in North America. This is going to be great skill for you. And yeah, it's a great thing for you to highlight when you're in the workforce. Awesome. Sujin, would you mind skipping forward for me? Okay, so in we found ourselves in the online space, from around spring break, and what we're finding is that, you know, some things get misconstrued via email, and maybe then we have to wait for like a whole day for somebody to email us back. So it's really a time saver to get that communication on point the first time. So the first point I have there is like being super clear. So like Maya was saying before, you're meeting in a Zoom call for a group and saying, okay, let's have let's have our outline done by 5 p.m. Wednesday. Then there's no way of misreading that. So being super clear on the details will help. Yes, when somebody asks you a question over email, read it carefully. This seems straightforward, but it really is something that can escape you. And read it thoroughly, and if you send them a comprehensive response, that really can minimize the back and forth email chain that we do get into oftentimes. Like we were saying before, June mentioned, if you're feeling emotional about reading a message, maybe you've got some feedback from your supervisor that wasn't what you wanted to hear. Just like sit with that for a few hours or even overnight, and just like think on it for a minute before you go making any rash decision. Oftentimes the more we consider something, we can see someone else's point of view. So that's a really good strategy. If you're video conferencing, we're all doing it. I know it's like exhausting, but it's like it is. We do want to be respectful for the people that are speaking, and I think we all want to be listened to while we're talking. So try and give that back to the people if possible. A deadline, exactly. We already talked about that. With the assertive communication, it's like we were able to strike a balance between ourselves and the other person's needs, but make sure you're listening to that other person, because if you don't, your compromise or your assertive communication may be like something that suits you a little better than that suits them, right? So those of us like myself who are kind of talkers, they like to talk, we're inclined to like jump in, but do your best to give that person time to say what they want to say, and then you can really get that solution that satisfies everybody. And what it does actually with assertive communication is it does build a good rapport for moving forward with that person. So if you tell your boss, oh hey, can't work this weekend, but let me know if you need me in the future, maybe they message you in 2 weekends time and they're like, hey, I need you on Saturday, can you do it? And you're like, actually I can. So it really does set up a good relationship moving forward. This is just a little bit of a pointer. Avoid criticizing people over email or chat. People have sent chats to the wrong group before. Very embarrassing, not very professional. Criticizing people over email, things get forwarded, there's a paper trail. Just be careful about that. That's a little bit of an aside, but it's professional communication. You don't want to get into that space. So I'm sure, a lot of you are already mindful of that, but that's just a reminder on that one. And again, consider your audience. If you're writing an email to a professor, it's great to greet them with a salutation if possible. And, we have some resources on that if you need any help with that. And with your employer, you may even text your boss or something, but, you might use the same language you would use with your friends. So just be mindful of your audience with your communication, and that will make things a little smoother. Before we move on to like some more kind of open-ended stuff, did anyone have anything to mention on these points, or did anyone want to add anything? I certainly haven't included everything on this slide. Is there anything during COVID that anyone's been struggling with in particular, or maybe some things have gotten easier? I think some people being in front of their computer all day, they're getting better with responding to emails, which is cool. Anything better or worse, or anything to add on that? All right, well, we have some guided questions here at the end, which we'd love to share with you, but I just wanted to kind of open up the floor and give you all a chance to put anything in the chat or jump on the mic, anything about what we've covered, even things we haven't covered. Yeah, so please go for it. It's definitely a complex issue, and we're kind of just scratching the surface today. Did anyone have anything to add?
Any comments? Do you think we should make like level 2 of having hard conversation webinar?
Intermediate
Level
level.
3,
Yeah.
how to talk politics with your family,
Right. That's expert level. I'm sorry, Sejun.
Mhm, mhm.
um, did you want to skip ahead to that discussion question, the first one,
Sure,
Sejun?
sure.
Okay, so if we think back towards that first slide, the passive, aggressive, and assertive, why is it difficult to assert ourselves? Any thoughts on that? Drop them in the chat. I'll provide one in the beginning. Maybe in the when you're talking to your boss, maybe you don't want to like question their authority. Okay, so that might be a reason you'd be apprehensive about asserting yourself in that environment. What else would prevent us from asserting ourselves?
Maya says, it's hard to get past the mind block of me, a regular person, and me as a successful professional.
Good one, Maya. Yeah, yeah. And Jordan says here, Sejun, that I always hate being misunderstood or coming off wrong. So I think,
Mhm.
Jordan, to your point, I think that gets back to being like super precise with your words. So if you're like, I'm not able to do those extra hours this weekend, but actually next weekend my finals are finished and I'll be free. In that situation, you're being precise with your language and your boss knows where you stand. So I think, Jordan, it definitely is like a skill, precise communication, but it really does help when you nail it because it leaves less room for misunderstanding. Maya, to your point, I think a lot of the stuff we're talking about here is really applicable in all areas. I don't know if you necessarily need to have your school self and your professional self. I think it's good to embed some of these practices early. And then once you've finished your degree and you're getting into the workforce, you already got those soft skills, which truthfully, employers are looking for more and more in the workforce. Nancy said that she's also afraid that it will backfire, which is, I would say, a pretty legitimate worry that you have, Nancy. I think, again, it's like in a situation where, say you're having a conversation with your parents maybe about doing chores. And, if you establish at the beginning of a semester that, your ACC commitments are going to take up X amount of hours, and we definitely have some like planners and schedules that you can even do with your family to be like, hey, during like 5 to 7, that's kind of the time that I'm setting aside for government, but I can totally like get to that chores or that family activity after that. So again, it's like about being upfront. And if you need some of those more formal tools, you can jump on our website or book an appointment with us and we can definitely help you navigate that space. So June, what do we have on the second one there?
I just wanted to say, at first, it's much easier to practice it with someone that you trust, so your friends and family, so that you know that nothing's gonna backfire or they're gonna get offended by your words. And I think you can kind of move on to someone who you are less close to, and then it'll get much easier for you, and then just come out naturally.
Yes,
And
that's
in
a
the
really good
second,
point. So we're just going to do this final one and then move on because I am aware we are at 6:30 now. So it's
Mhm.
kind of similar to what we were talking about before. I find it easier, more difficult to assert myself when I am around. Personally, I find it a lot easier to assert myself with people that I talk to all the time. People that I live with because I talk to them all the time. What
I
about you
think I
guys?
find it easier to assert myself when I am around people that I don't know really. So like people who I don't really know, it's easier for me to assert myself. And
Interesting.
and I think it's more difficult to assert myself when I am around the people that I want them to like me.
Yeah, so
Like,
Maya kind of said the same thing as me, that she's
mhm.
more comfortable. Maya, were you saying that it's more difficult or it's easier to assert yourself with people that you're comfortable with? I see what you're saying, Sejun, that you don't want to hurt your friend's feelings, so you're a little more careful about that, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Easier to assert yourself with people you're
Mhm.
comfortable with. Yeah, me too, Maya. It's really an interesting one. But I think with people that they know what you're like, so they're like, oh, he or she is generally like patient, but this is happening or whatever. So they understand your background. Sejun, did you want to add anything more? I'm just mindful of the time before we wrap up.
Right. Before we end, we would really appreciate if you can fill out this evaluation form. I'll also write it down at the chat.
Yeah, I just put that in the chat, Sejun.
Mhm.
It really does help us make these better for next time. You might be like, oh, it should go for 30 minutes. It should go for an hour and a half. Like, could you do this topic? So it's anonymous, the feedback. It really does help us improve. So if you have should only take you a couple of minutes. So we'd love you to do that. And I mean,
Mhm.
we'll stick around for anyone if they have any more questions. But thanks for joining us. It's a really good, enjoyable time for us to do this. Yes, so June,
And
did
if
you
you
want to
have
add
any other
anything?
questions, or, you know, you want to say something or make an appointment with us, or you want to find out more about what academic coaching is, you can email us at academiccoaches@austincc.edu.